Rome's census was mandatory, public, and enforced by law. Refuse to participate, and you could lose your citizenship. Facebook's data collection is technically optional, buried in a settings menu, and most users don't even know it's happening. And yet, somehow, the optional, modern system knows far more about you than Rome's government ever knew about its citizens. How does less coercion produce more information? Think about the last time someone truly knew you. Not your name, not your face, your habits, your needs, what you're likely to do next. That kind of knowing only works on a small scale. A tribal leader can hold a few hundred faces in his memory. A shop owner can remember what his regulars buy. But what happens when the number of people stops being something a single mind can hold? That's the wall every growing institution eventually hits. An empire spreads across millions of people its rulers will never meet. A platform reaches billions of users its founders will never speak to. And yet both still need to answer the same basic questions. Who is this person? What do they have? What are they likely to do? This isn't just a historical curiosity. A government that can't identify who owes taxes or who owes service to the state cannot function. A platform that can't tell who you are and what you want cannot sell you anything or show you anything worth seeing. The hard part is that people don't cooperate easily. They move. They exaggerate. They hide things. So any system built to know millions of strangers has to solve one stubborn problem. How do you get true, useful information out of people who have every reason not to fully give it? Rome's answer to this problem was almost brutally direct. It didn't try to observe its citizens quietly. It ordered them to show up and explain themselves. Every 5 years, in a ritual period called the lustrum, Roman citizens were legally required to appear in person before officials known as censors. There was no hiding from this. Failing to show up, or lying once you got there, carried real consequences. The head of each household, called the paterfamilias, stood before these officials and declared, under oath, exactly what he owned. His age, his property, his land, his livestock, the people living under his roof, including his children and his slaves. All of it spoken aloud, all of it recorded. This information didn't just sit in an archive. It immediately did 3 things at once. It determined how much tax a person owed. It determined whether and how he would serve in the military. And it determined how much political weight his vote carried. Wealthier citizens were sorted into higher classes, like the senatorial or equestrian class, and with that status came both greater tax burden and greater influence. Poorer citizens were sorted lower, with lighter formal duties, but also less say. Here's the part that made the whole system work. Lying to a censor wasn't just frowned upon. It was dangerous. A citizen caught making a false declaration could lose his status, get reassigned to a worse class, or be publicly shamed by the censors themselves. So honesty wasn't really a moral choice for most people. It was the only reasonable one. The punishment for getting caught was simply worse than the cost of declaring the truth. The censors didn't stop at wealth, either. Part of their job was reviewing a citizen's conduct and reputation. This turned the census into more than an economic tool. It became a mechanism of social control, reinforcing not just who had money, but who was seen as respectable enough to hold status in Roman society. What's easy to miss is how clever the underlying design really was. Rome didn't have the manpower to go investigate every citizen's belongings on its own. So instead, it built a system where citizens investigated themselves, out loud, under threat of real punishment. The labor of data collection was pushed onto the very people being counted. Rome didn't need to watch its citizens. It only needed them to believe that lying wasn't worth the risk. That system worked for centuries. But almost 2,000 years later, a very different kind of institution needed the exact same kind of information, and it got there without a single oath, a single censor, or a single legal requirement to participate at all. Facebook faced the same underlying question Rome did. How do you get accurate information out of billions of people you will never meet in person? But it built its answer on the opposite foundation. Nothing about using Facebook is legally required. Nobody swears an oath before creating an account. And yet the platform ends up knowing more about most people than Rome's government ever knew about its citizens. Instead of asking people to declare themselves once every few years, Facebook collects information constantly. Your profile details, what you like and share, your location, information from the device you're using. Even your behavior on websites outside of Facebook itself, tracked through tools like the Metapixel. None of this requires a formal declaration. It happens quietly, in the background, as a byproduct of simply using the service. That raw behavior then gets sorted the same way Roman wealth was sorted into property classes. Except instead of senatorial or equestrian status, users get grouped into interest categories and behavioral traits. This sorting determines what shows up in your feed and which ads get placed in front of you. It's a classification system doing the same basic job Rome's did, deciding what a person receives based on which category they fall into, just built from clicks and likes instead of declared property. The incentive structure is where the real difference shows up. Rome extracted honesty through law and fear. Facebook extracts information through convenience. Nobody is threatened with losing their citizenship if they don't share their data. Instead, people trade their information for something they want. Staying in touch with friends. Entertainment, a free service that would otherwise cost money. Meta has stated publicly that it does not sell user data directly to advertisers. Instead, it uses that data internally to sell precisely targeted ad placements, which means the information itself is the engine driving the business, not a product being handed off to someone else. What makes this system especially different from Rome's is how invisible it is. Roman citizens knew, in exact detail, what was being recorded and why, because they were the ones saying it out loud. Facebook users often don't. Research from Pew found that a majority of users had no idea the platform had assembled lists of their interests and personal traits at all. Rome's system worked because people understood the transaction. Facebook's system largely works because most people don't fully see it happening. Two systems, separated by 2,000 years, built to solve the identical problem. One extracted the truth through visible law and consequence. The other extracts it through quiet convenience most users never examine closely. On the surface, those look like opposite strategies. But strip away the technology, and they start to look like the same machine, running on different fuel. Set the details aside for a moment. Forget the sensors. Forget the pixel trackers. Underneath both systems is the exact same equation. Any institution that grows past the point of personal knowledge faces the same challenge. It needs a way to turn individual people into information that can be compared, sorted, and acted on. And it needs that information for the same underlying reason in both cases, to decide how to allocate something limited. In Rome, that meant deciding who paid what in taxes and who served in the military. On Facebook, it means deciding whose attention gets which ad and whose feed shows which content. Different outputs, same basic function. Turn people into data, then use that data to decide who gets what. Both systems also depend on three identical building blocks. A method for collecting information, a system for sorting that information into categories, and an incentive strong enough to make people actually participate. Take away any one of those pieces, and the whole machine stops working. Rome and Facebook simply built each piece out of completely different material. Look closely, and the similarities go even deeper. In both systems, the information technically comes from the people themselves. Roman citizens generated it by speaking under oath. Facebook users generate it just by living their normal digital lives, posting, clicking, scrolling. In both systems, that information gets converted into a category that decides what a person receives, a property class in Rome, an interest group on Facebook. And in both systems, this can't be a one-time event. Rome repeated its count every 5 years because static information about a growing, changing population quickly becomes useless. Facebook recollects constantly, in real time, for the same reason. A system that stops updating its picture of people eventually loses its grip on them. But the differences matter just as much, and they shouldn't be smoothed over. Rome extracted honesty through coercion. Refused to participate or lie about your property, and you faced real legal consequences. Facebook extracts participation through convenience. There's no punishment for withholding information, only the quiet cost of a slightly less tailored experience. That leads to the sharpest difference between the two. Roman citizens knew exactly what was being recorded because they were the ones saying it out loud, in public, to a government official. Most Facebook users, based on the Pew research already mentioned, didn't know the extent of what was being recorded about them at all. One system ran on visible obligation. The other runs on invisible convenience. That difference points to a pattern that shows up again and again, far beyond just these two examples. Any system that grows past personal scale knowledge eventually has to choose between two paths to get true information out of people. It can compel that information openly, the way a census or a tax audit does, or it can incentivize it quietly, the way targeted advertising and loyalty programs do. Compelling information openly tends to be expensive and visible since it requires enforcement, officials, and legal consequences. Incentivizing it quietly tends to be cheaper and easier to scale, since it just requires making participation convenient enough that most people never think to question it. As institutions grow larger and more automated, they tend to drift from the first path toward the second, not because one is more honest than the other, but because the second one scales further with less friction, which leads to the one idea worth carrying away from all of this. Whenever an institution, ancient or modern, claims to know you at scale, there are really only two questions worth asking. What exactly am I trading in exchange for being known this way? And do I actually understand the terms of that trade? Roman citizens knew the answer to both questions clearly, even if the terms weren't especially fair. Wealth declared under oath in exchange for a fixed place in the tax system, the military, and the vote. Many people today can't answer those same questions nearly as easily, not because the systems asking for their information are necessarily worse, but because the terms of the exchange are far less visible. The tools for collecting human information have changed completely, from parchment and oaths to servers and behavioral data. What hasn't changed is the underlying question every person facing one of these systems is still left holding. Not whether being known is good or bad, but whether they actually understand what they're handing over and why. So here's the question this leaves you with. Rome's citizens knew exactly what they were trading, their wealth, declared under oath, in exchange for a place in the political and military order. Today, most of us aren't nearly as sure what we're trading or to whom. So, think about the last platform, app, or institution that knows something about you. Do you actually know the terms of that trade? And if you don't, is that because the system is hiding it, or because you've never stopped to ask? Drop your answer in the comments. I'll read through them.